welcome to this week's episode of the County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. It's been a wet year, and for a lot of people who heard all that drought in the previous years, they're going, phew, okay, we can kind of relax. But today we're going to talk about that topic. We have with us for our program Joshua Palmer, who's from the Division of Water Resources for the state, and we're going to spend the next half hour talking about, can you really relax in a wet year in Utah? So, Joshua, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you taking the time out. You know, when I started doing the background research for this episode, I actually went to the wrong department. So the first call that I placed was to the state water engineer who is in charge of water rights. And they said, well, no, really, if you're wanting to talk about water supply, you need to be talking to the Department of Water Resources. So I wanted to start by maybe just comparing your division or department with the other state agencies that deal with water, so people have a better picture of what the water picture is across the state.
So the Utah Division of Water Resources, we do a lot of different things, but essentially we are focused on making sure that Utah has the water it needs going forward. And so there's a lot of different ways that we get there, and we can go into more detail on that later, but essentially we want to make sure that kids and grandkids have the water they need to be able to grow up here and thrive here. And then the Division of Water Rights, so that's more about law, that's more about water law, who has the water right. They go through, they make sure that people aren't using too much of that water right, they're not overusing, and so it's more of a legal thing. Then you have the Division of Drinking Water. They partner with municipal and other systems to make sure that those systems are up to a certain standard. And then you have the Division of Water Quality, and they make sure that the quality of that water is safe for consumption. So those are kind of your main water agencies.
I imagine there's some overlap back and forth. And so how would this break up? So anytime you're dealing with water rights, like Snake Valley, that would become a Division of Water Rights issue.
That's right.
Okay, but if you're talking about maintenance of reservoirs in the state system, that would be your department?
It could be either or. So you have a dam safety that's within water rights, and so some of that maintenance and the safety of those facilities would be more within dam safety, which is in water rights. But then as far as the supply that comes from those, we're involved in those kind of things as well.
Okay, so you're basically about the water itself and how to develop it, and water rights deals with the structures that hold it. Is that a safe thing to say? Yeah,
you know, from a safety perspective, water rights is the one who goes out and inspects these dams and make sure that they're safe. So we're making sure that that supply is there, and that whether that is from efficiency, whether that is from having conversations with multiple entities about interconnections, or just how to stretch that supply out longer. Ours is about just making sure the there's actually enough water there.
So if a canal were to breach, that would be water rights. They would deal with that?
With canals, we actually work on a lot of canal projects. It's kind of complicated, right? So we actually have a revolving loan program where we'll go out and help an agricultural user, for example, revitalize something like that. And then it becomes more safe. And those kind of things. Specifically with water rights, you're looking at dam safety, and it's really just that facility, that dam. And so we'll empower those farmers and those canal owners through our loan program.
Okay, so I guess a very quick last question is there's a division between water quality and drinking water. What's that division? Why is there a difference?
So it's the quality of water that you consume versus the facilities that deliver it.
Well, this has started off to be a very interesting conversation. We will be right back. We have our conversation with Joshua Palmer from the Division of Water Resources here on the county seat. We'll take up the topic of how we go from drought to drenched and back again when we return here on the county seat. We'll be right back.
Look south to adventure. Look south to beauty. Look south to San Juan County. Out here, the road goes on forever, and what you'll find will change how you see the world. Climb on your OHV and discover forgotten landscapes and vistas that challenge the imagination. From Blanding and Monticello to the cliff faces of Monument Valley, we're open and ready for you to explore. San Juan County, Utah's canyon country.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
The world is full of roads. Some lead you home after life throws you a curve. Some lead to a horizon as vast as your imagination, with adventure around every corner. Some lead to history and civic pride, where freedom is more than just a word. You'll find all these roads in Millard County, Utah. All you have to do is pick one. Millard County. Pick your adventure.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking with Josh Palmer from the Division of Water Resources of the state. Okay, so it seems to me like, 1983, they've got water running down State Street. And then 4 or 5 years later, we're talking about being parched again. And then, we get another big wet year in 2000 and everything comes up. And it just seems like we just go, we're like the car that starts to gasp out of gas and it runs across a gas station just in time. Is there actually kind of an observable cycle to our wet and dry cycles here in Utah?
Well, I'll tell you, in the last 15 years, what we're seeing is we'll see one really good year for about every 5 to 6 average or below average years. And so what we joke around about at the office is that's how you get a Utah average, is you get one good year and then 5 low ones. And so those are the more recent trends that we're seeing.
The question that would immediately come to mind is saying, well, if we have a really wet year, we should be capturing as much of that water as we possibly can. Have we developed our river resources across the state to the maximum extent possible to prepare for those stretches of dry?
Yeah, there are still resources out there that could be developed in the future. But right now, the reservoirs got so low last year that we're really excited about just the existing facilities filling up as well. So those are things that we look at in the long term, is planning those things out. But for right now, we're excited about the existing infrastructure filling up. We're also excited about it spilling over and replenishing the rivers and replenishing the soils. All of that is really important for Utah, including its positive impact on the Great Salt Lake, which has already gone up more than 2 feet.
Most communities have water systems, and they either have a conservancy district that they've developed. Is there a value in developing water conservancy districts over just each town developing their own direct water?
We've seen conservancy districts show a lot of leadership in the state of Utah. We've seen them show leadership by partnering with communities and giving them more resources, both from an education standpoint, a conservation standpoint, a planning standpoint. We've seen them really show leadership. How appropriate a conservancy district is in a given area kind of depends on the area, depends on the population, depends on what a community is trying to achieve, but we've definitely seen leadership from these conservancy districts.
So I would look at like Kane County. They just finished a big reservoir project in Canals, and that was all done by the conservancy district. I don't know if they interfaced with your division at all in that process, but they put a pretty good sized lake in there. So
Yeah, we think that at the community level, they really understand their water system probably better than we do. And so we try to work as partners at that local level. And that's another thing that's an advantage of a Conservancy District, is that they're on the ground. They're there with the citizens. They know what those needs are. And sometimes, especially in a state like Utah, we have unique needs depending on the region.
Most communities, I think in my mind, I drive through the state. Wales has got a reservoir. Redmond's got a reservoir. Kane County just built a reservoir. There are reservoirs in the canyons of Salt Lake. Are there any communities in the state that do not have a reservoir system and completely rely on wells still?
Yes. Yeah, there are communities, and some of them are more rural. But yeah, there are communities that really are relying on aquifers, groundwater, wells. There are still communities out there.
And of sizable note?
Depends on the definition of sizable. Most of your more populated areas do have the benefit of reservoir storage.
Okay, I just wondered, aquifers obviously refill along with reservoirs. Is there an advantage to putting above ground water storage on a community, or is that just strictly a formula of, well, we've grown so big, wells can't handle it anymore?
Utah is unique from some of the rest of the nation in that it's so large and the climate is fairly different depending on the region that you're in, that in some ways, in some places, you're wanting to look at aquifer storage and recovery. That might be a really good option for you. In other places, you might want to look at really trying to focus on making the best of your existing reservoirs. In other places, you just have such a great opportunity with water efficiency and water conservation that there's just a lot there. And so it kind of depends on the community, and we try to look at the specific needs of that community and partner with that community in a way that it's appropriate for them.
Excellent. It leads us to a point of conservation, which will lead us forward in our next block. You're watching The County Seat. We're talking about water resources in the state. We'll be right back in just a minute.
It's one more, here we go again. I tell myself I'm not enough, but one more time is not enough. One last kiss and then you were gone, and I'm here wishing you could stay a little longer. Stay a little longer. Wishing you could stay a little longer.
There is a place where looking out means looking in, where an impression lasting only a few seconds will be imprinted on a life forever, where courage is forged and innocence rediscovered, where remembering is rewarding and forgetting unforgettable. There is a place where truth is felt and where seeing is believing. There is a place.
Have you ever wanted to recreate the world around you? Add some excitement, culture, adventure? Well, there's no need to remake the world when that perfect combination already exists. Just remember 4 words. Welcome to Weber County. In Ogden, you'll find everything you're looking for, from the top of Powder Mountain to the restaurants of our revitalized downtown. Ogden, Utah. Mountain to metro and everything in between. Visit Ogden.com. If you're looking for gold at the end of the rainbow, you'll probably be disappointed, because in Piute County, the only thing you'll find at the end of a rainy day is the promise of adventure. Highway 89 is your access point through Marysville and the historic trails of Bouillon Canyon. Find yourself in the mountains one minute and the desert the next as you follow in the footsteps of the pioneers. Whitewater raft, fish, hike, all within a few minutes of a comfortable bed and a warm meal. Find out why the world has made Piute County its off-road destination. Piute County, the place where the rainbow ends.
Welcome back to The County Seat. We are talking today about water resources in the state. We kind of left the last pause on saying conservation is a big part of making water work in Utah. Joshua, I want to kind of turn our attention to, somebody's thinking at home, well, if St. George just grows, just build another reservoir. I mean, is the solution that simple? Or, can you identify that you're out of water and then say, well, we just have to pull in our belt for 3 years and build a new lake?
with our division, we think that efficiency comes first.
Right.
So we believe that water conservation, water efficiency needs to be a core ethic in Utah. So it's independent of whatever the weather is. And so on a high year, on a dry year, we feel like using the water that you need, but not wasting, I think that's a Utah ethic. We have two other parts of it, is just everybody do your part. We're not expecting, too extreme, just try to do your best to only use what you need. And then the other one is every step is progress. So we celebrate every step along the way, from the person who is just turning off the water while they're brushing their teeth, to the person who is watering their landscape efficiently, to the person who might be installing water-wise landscaping. All of those things lead to water efficiency, and that leads to less strain on our reservoirs, less strain on our water supply, and that water can be used to help Utah's kids and grandkids along the way.
So my daughter's currently doing this at her house. She's taking out the grass strips and she's putting in, water-wise landscaping, native grasses and stuff that hardly need any water.
Yeah.
And so you look at her one little house in Salt Lake City with a valley that's filled with another 800,000 houses, or whatever the number is. How much impact does that single thing make?
When you're talking about park strip, take about however many number of those houses is, and multiply it by 7,000 to 10,000 gallons per year. And that's your number. That Utah can save between 7,000 and 10,000 gallons per year just by people making their park strip more water-wise.
Just the park strip?
Yeah, just the park strip.
And that's per individual house?
Yeah. Yeah.
7,000 gallons of water goes on a park strip?
7,000 to 10,000. It's actually something I'm working on right now, actually. I'm water-wising up my park strip, and I have about a 200 square foot park strip. And I'm in that process of doing it myself. But that's not the only reason why to water-wise up your park strip. Actually, there's a huge opportunity just for curb appeal. Some of these plants, these water-wise plants that you're putting in there, they're flowering, they're beautiful. It breaks up the visuals of your yard. So really, you can make that curb appeal improve by implementing some of these water-wise practices. A really great resource, by the way, it's called localscapes.com. They have plans on there, and the thing that you'll notice there is that your first thought is, this looks better than my yard. Oh. Your first thought isn't conservation.
Yeah.
Your first thought is, wow, that looks a lot better than my yard. And it just happens to be water-wise. So there's a lot of resources out there where we can have an incredible curb appeal. We just happen to be using less water. But there's also, just by watering your landscape according to its needs, residents in Utah can save between 70,000 and 300,000 gallons of water per year, just by only watering based on what is needed and not overwatering.
So basically, you have to kind of reset your automatic timers need to be updated consistently so that you're saying, oh, we're going to skip it today because it rained yesterday.
Yeah, or there's technology out there. There's smart timers that will have your landscape only water based on evapotranspiration, and they have a rain shutoff. And so that helps your neighbors like you more because you're not watering in the rain, but it also helps you become more efficient. Our division also puts out a weekly lawn watering guide that takes the guesswork out of it, and that is based on what we're seeing from several weather stations throughout the state. The recommendation is by county, and so you can take a look at that weekly lawn watering guide and say, well, I'm supposed to water 1, 2, or 3 times this week, and if you follow that, then we estimate that could save Utah almost more than 20 billion gallons of water a year if people just follow the weekly lawn watering guide.
So if I lived in Torrey, I could get information relevant to Torrey as opposed to Salt Lake.
Exactly. We do it by county because we understand that those recommendations are going to be different. If you look at this week's weekly lawn watering guide, there are still some counties out there where we're not recommending that water come on at all. And there's some that we're recommending 1 watering and some that are recommending 2. But the thing we always say is that if Mother Nature waters your lawn, she does a better job than you do, and you can turn that water off and let that happen.
If you are, you're driving past Echo and you see the spillway in effect, and you're going, Well, I guess I don't have to worry so much about watering my lawn because the spillway's in effect, and it's either going to go over the spillway or I'm just going to water a little extra. What do you carry forward? How much of that water that you're saving in a wet year like this year actually comes back to be put on your lawn 4 years from now?
Right. So, well, it all depends. So if we're more efficient, will potentially more water get into those streams, get into those riverbeds, replenish those soils, and help the Great Salt Lake out? Yeah, it will. But then also over time, as things heat up, it'll remain more full longer. And so that supply will be there. We also already talked about a Utah average, right? So one high year for several dry years. So being efficient throughout the season is really important, because what happens towards the end of the summer, that's what we're looking at. Where are those reservoirs at the end of that summer when there's already been evaporation, when there's already been usage? And that can impact years of supply based on what we do right now. We would love to get to the end of this season and have a lot of reservoirs be really, really full.
So what you're saying is that 60 days that the spillways may be playing, it's still going to be offset for the rest of the season when you get up in line for the next winter.
Yeah, and that's, we really think it's a Utah ethic just not to waste.
So let's talk about two things that come up in the news a lot. One is building new water sources, building new reservoirs. People are talking about it all the time. Yeah. You know, if we start talking about building a new dam on the Bear River today, when does it actually become part of the water supply system?
You know, a big project can take 50 years.
Wow.
Because, you know, you start out talking about what are the projections, what are the trends, what do we estimate the need is going to be? And so it starts out with those conversations. But then you go to, okay, what is feasible? What could actually be done? Is this something that is actually worth pursuing? That's a multi-year process. And within that process, sometimes you identify things that can push out the need for a project further. So all of a sudden you're saying, okay, well, we can look at it a little bit longer. Once you get to a point where it's getting close to where you're needing that, what you would go through is an environmental impact statement, followed by design, followed by construction. All of these things take quite a while.
Okay, very good. It's a good place for us to take a break. We'll be right back with our conversation on water resources. I've written down a whole page of notes here just listening so far today. You're watching The County Seat.
What would you do with an extra day in Utah Valley? Explore the Wasatch Mountains? Snap a family photo at Bridal Veil Falls. Cool off on Utah Lake or the Provo River. No matter what you're searching for, you can find it in Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
In a place that is beyond words, there is nothing to be said, except take your time in Bryce Canyon country.
Welcome back to the county seat. We're talking about water conservation. We're talking about water resources across the state. In this long list of people coming up for excuses not to conserve, Josh, there's one more that I hear about all the time, and that is about secondary water. And people saying all we need to do is just like pump the water out of the sewage treatment plant for everybody to sprinkle their lawns, and then we don't need to worry about it. Tell me about does Utah actually have any secondary water systems?
Yes, there are hundreds of thousands of secondary water connections. Yes, it's actually pretty extensive, and we have a lot of that available. Now, depending on the region, we have a lot of it available in northern Utah and some other regions. The difference between drinking water quality and secondary water isn't really in quantity, it's in quality. And so a lot of times it's coming from the same source, you're just not treating it at the same level. And so it doesn't mean that when you use it that, well, I'm not wasting water because it's secondary. You're just using less of a quality of water. In fact, we think that there's a huge opportunity when it comes to secondary water for us to become more efficient. For years, there wasn't a meter that would measure
how much you're using
for secondary water, and because it would get clogged up with dirt and grime and all of that kind of thing. Well, there's a meter on the market, a few meters on the market that have a 20-year warranty now. Our division recently put $3 million a year in our secondary water loan program to try to get meters in the ground, because what we're finding is that just when people see what they're using versus what they should be using, because it can be measured now, and this is something that Weber-based and Water Conservancy District found, is that sometimes they're using 40% less just by seeing what they're using versus what they should be using. That's a huge opportunity. And so we would really love to get as many secondary water meters in the ground as we can.
Okay, yeah, that really sounds like a good tip. So we're going to go right back to square one for the last minute of the program.
Yeah.
What are the things people should be doing, even though it's a nice wet year? In fact, it's cloudy outside the studio today, and it's been raining. What do we need to be doing as individuals, no matter where we live, every single day?
You know, especially this time of year, we're really focused on outside watering. On average, every time somebody waters their lawn, it's 3,000 gallons of water.
Wow.
And so when you think, oh, it's not a big deal that I'm watering one more time than I should, well, that's 3,000 gallons of water. There's a huge opportunity in us just watering our landscape based on what's needed. We really encourage people to follow us on Facebook, to follow us on Twitter. We put out the weekly lawn watering guide there. It's on slowtheflow.org, which is another good resource. We have conservewater.utah.gov, which is a really good resource. We really encourage people to do what they can. We celebrate every step, and that step is not going to be the same for everybody. It might be a huge step for somebody just to get down from that 7 days a week that they didn't need to do. We celebrate that. We also celebrate the people like your daughter who are taking out the park strip and making it more water-wise. We celebrate it all.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Appreciate your joining us. Thank you for watching the County Seat. We'll see you next week. And remember, conserve water.